composer so loved by musicians, he is by far the most popular composer tattoo I've ever seen. This one's for all my Dutchies out there. So grab your hammer and your theses, and let's check out Bach's St. Matthew Passion. I say, who the devil is the St. Matthew person, and about what is he so passionate?
Dear husband, you jest. Don't you know the etymological derivations of the word passion?
Why, good wife, certainly not. I pray make haste with the correction of this most calamitously disconcerting comprehensive crevice.
While it is true that the word passion today refers to any feeling of strong emotion, if one harkens back to its Latinate origin, it actually means suffering. And in this case, dear husband, the suffering of St. Matthew.
I say. So sorry, I couldn't help it over here. It's actually the suffering according to St. Matthew.
What nonsense.
No.
The possessive clearly indicates.
It's actually the implied preposition. So, I know prepositions are a bitch. An important bitch. But, well, if it's not St. Matthew's suffering, whose is it? Jesus's. Because it was his sin. You know what, guys? How about I just take it from here? So yeah, if it's Jesus's passion, his suffering, who is St. Matthew? Well, for those of you who didn't attend Christian summer camp and therefore can't recite all the books of the Bible to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you weirdos. St. Matthew, or just Matthew as he's known in the Bible, was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Well, after Jesus' death, 4 of those disciples decided that they wanted to document Jesus' life story. Except they all did it separately. And then rather than combine all of their works into one big story, like, would make sense, they decided to just include all 4 of their versions in the final Bible. Those stories became known as the Gospels, and they were written by Mark, Luke, John, and Matthew. Thankfully, that religion didn't catch on because that would have been really... Oh, it did? It's the most popular in the world? Hasn't anybody pointed out the inconsistency? So that's what we're talking about here. The passion, the suffering, the crucifixion of Jesus, according to this one particular disciple, St. Matthew. So, let's look at that story. Bach decides to start with Jesus and his disciples chilling in Jerusalem 2 days before he's going to be captured for crucifixion. And Jesus is just like doing his thing, he's being nice to people while other people get mad, he's predicting the future, he's telling people to drink his blood. Just Jesus stuff. On the night before his crucifixion, he goes out into a garden to pray with his disciples, and one of them, Judas, turns him into the guards, who have been ordered to arrest him. And Jesus, this is so long. Do I have to read this whole thing? Jesus gets arrested, Judas hangs himself, Peter denies Jesus 3 times, chickens scream, Barabbas gets set free, blood, 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 Jesus dies. And that's where Bach leaves us. Yeah, there's no happy ending. There's no Easter morning, there's no stones rolled away from tombs. It's a tragedy. And I know classifying this piece into an entertainment genre like tragedy at all is probably kind of aggressively thespian, but I'm gonna stand by it making sense because it isn't just a piece, it's an oratorio. An oratorio is a usually religious, theatrical composition for orchestra, choir, and soloists playing characters. Actually, the only thing that doesn't make this an opera is that it was meant to be a concert. Think of it like actors doing a cold reading. The script and the story are there, but nothing else is. And in the case of an oratorio, that's the finished product. Okay, side note, it is not unheard of for pieces like this to have costumes and props and all the stuff that makes theater, especially for pieces that are as popular as this, and especially in places like here in the Netherlands, where it's an annual tradition and pretty much every village has their own rendition of it that they do. It's also a very busy market day and I'm super self-conscious with all the people walking around. Could have timed this better. But after 40 years of watching people get all dressed up in black and doing the same thing, it gets a little bit samey, And so I don't blame them for adding costumes and props and stuff. The point is, if you go see this and there are people who are up there wearing costumes and carrying props and you think to yourself, but Kate said, no, there are non-traditional performances, but historically, this is the way that things were usually done. Cool. Let's talk about Bach. The Matthew Passion was written by Johann Sebastian Bach with a libretto by I have no idea how to pronounce that. Is it German? Picanta? Picanti? It premiered in either 1727 or 1729. The jury's apparently still out on that one. And then Bach spent the next 15 or 20 years tweaking it until he finally said it was done. This was also Bach's second Passion that we know of. The first having been the Passion according to John. the St. John Passion. Same story, two totally different works. We don't know a lot about how Bach wrote this piece or what the composition process was like, but we do know that when he wrote it, he was the musical director at the Thomaskirche, the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, Germany. The position itself was hella demanding. He had to write, rehearse, and perform new music every single week, prepare the choir to sing full services at 4 different churches, and organize the music for city events like elections and festivals. Then on top of all of that, he had to write music for high holy days that didn't happen to fall on Sundays. Like pretty much every day of Holy Week. What is Holy Week? Well, besides being the best week of the year for church musicians who are paid by the service, Holy Week is the week between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday. Where does this go? We've got Palm Sunday, when Jesus came into Jerusalem on a donkey and people were really happy to see him and they were waving like palm leaves and shit. Then we have Holy Monday, which no one cares about. And then we have Holy Tuesday, which also no one cares about because all we want to do is get to Spy Wednesday. This is when Judas betrays Jesus for a couple pieces of silver, leading us into the Last Supper. Then we have Good Friday, when Jesus was crucified. Then we have Easter Vigil, which is really just an excuse for us to have a very dramatic service waiting for Jesus to be resurrected, leading us to, you can't see me, leading us to Easter Sunday. All of these are services that Bach would have had to have written music for every single year. The St. Matthew Passion was written for a Good Friday service, which is why it ends when Jesus dies. And it's still programmed even in modern times, usually in the early spring, most of the time before Easter. So if you want to go see the Matthew Passion, go on Good Friday. Something else cool about this piece, Bach was a little bit of a rebel. In the Lutheran Church at the time, changing the text of the Bible, even just to paraphrase, was nicht Guds, immediately smitted, but the Bible's a little bit boring, so he commissioned to write some poetry about the actual biblical passage, and then he wrote pieces for 4 soloists, a soprano, countertenor, tenor, and bass, to come in and just kind of comment on what was going on in the actual biblical passage. It's kind of like watching a Shakespeare play, except the play pauses every 5 or 6 minutes for a modern person to come on stage and be all, I mean, can you believe? And then beyond that, Bach also threw in some chorales, hymns, melodies, and tunes the audience definitely would have known, just for that little bit extra variety. Okay, is the Passion ready for table 17 yet? Almost, just adding a little extra flavor. What does that mean? Just put in a few extra things. Like what? This is the Bible. You know, some carrots, some solos, a little extra pepper, a chorale or 2. Okay, why would you want to mess with it? Taste. Oh, I see. It needs more time. See, the joke there is time, because it's like an herb that you put into a dish, but then also like time on a clock, because he wanted to make the piece longer. See, what I did there was explain. So in the end, here's what we wind up with. A narrator called the evangelist, for some reason. He's a tenor, and he's basically any line that's not a character. Then you'll have some soloists singing the characters, like Jesus, Pontius Pilate, basically anyone who has a name. Then we have 4 other soloists who aren't named characters commenting on the action. And then of course we have the choir. Sometimes they're the crowd, sometimes they're commenting on the action, sometimes they're singing chorales. They do a lot of stuff. Oh, hello. There is something else that's important to know. This piece is in German. But why follow along with a translation when you can just learn to speak Deutsch? Repeat after me. Ich wünschte, ich wäre Holländer. Obviously, I can't fit all the music into this video as much as I wish I could, so I'm just gonna focus on 3 things, that's 6 things. 3 things, the most popular, then my favorite, then some themes that you'll wanna look out for. Far and away, the most well-known aria from this piece is Erbarme dich, sung by one of the commentator soloists. Jesus is on trial, and Peter, another one of the 12 disciples, has just denied having known him for the 3rd time. A rooster crows, and And then only then does Peter remember that Jesus predicted all this would happen. This aria also happens to be directly preceded by one of my favorite stupid little parts in the entire thing. It's crazy. It's too small for me to like it so much, but I do. When the evangelist says, "And he went out and wept with great bitterness," Bach writes this amazingly dissonant, long-ass line that literally sounds like a cry of agony. All right, ready? For me, it's not just the line itself. It's the way that the vowel is placed. It works in English too. You can do "and cried bitterly" and put that "ah" in a really ugly place. And cried. Oh, sounds like crying bitterly. Oh God. And then it goes into the most... Well, listen. Then the violinist stands up. And there's those leans that you get on the notes. That's called an appoggiatura, when you hold that note a little bit longer to lean into the next one, and it sounds very dissonant. That's the crying, that's the weeping that you get in this aria. Peter weeping, us weeping. Absolutely stunning. God. And then we start singing. Mercy, my God, for the sake of my tears. Just, you can hear the tears, right? And this is a particularly beautiful piece. Listen to the violin weeping. And this is a particularly beautiful rendition because the way that he's singing it is keeping it very straight, it just sounds so sad to me. The violin is really doing the weeping and the singer is doing almost like that calm crying. Speaking of the violinist, this piece is actually a really good example of something we get throughout this entire work, which is this idea that it's not just a singer who's the soloist. Every aria, and the only duet in the piece, is actually paired with an instrument in the orchestra. Sometimes it's a flute or an oboe or a viola da gamba. This time it's a violin. So how those two soloists interact with each other, the choices they make as a team, the way the conductor interprets the piece, the dynamics, the placement, the tempo, everything is intentional, not just in the way that Bach wrote it, but also in the way it's being performed. I love this piece. Right after Jesus gets arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, the soprano and the countertenor come out and they have this little moment, the only duet in the entire piece, and it is absolutely stunning. Now, I know I'm a bit biased because I'm a soprano and I have sung this a lot, and also I love oboes, and there is an absolutely gorgeous oboe and flute duet that goes along with this duet between the singers, but oh my God, it's just so stunning. Just what an absolutely gorgeous duet. honestly, I'm just like covered in goosebumps. It's so beautiful. So you can hear that we've got this gorgeous legato duet happening here. Then you have the choir coming in, moving the action along, telling the guards, no, stop, leave him alone, don't bind him up. And this is the only time, I think, I'll double check that, but I think this is the only time that we have this commentary from the soloists happening at the same time as the plot is being furthered. And this is also the only duet that we have, so I don't know what that means, but I've always just thought this was such a cool little section. Because what happens next is we have this for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then out of nowhere, the choir escapes these bounds and just goes straight into this action continuing. I just think it's so rock and roll. It's so hard not to sing along. And this is the lightning and the thunder. Blitze and Donna. And you can hear it. Oh, oh, oh. You get this churning in the lower strings. You can hear these running eighths all over the place. There's this one line that's being repeated by every vocal part. Öffne den feurigen Abgrund. And then these bars of melismatic passages for the rumbling of the thunder and this like almost onomatopoeic blitz of the lightning and everything. I know. Okay. Sorry. It's just so good. I know. From a performance perspective, let me tell you, this is the most fun part in the entire frickin' thing. In my experience, conductors will usually start with this at the first rehearsal because, first of all, it's a good way to test if you've learned your music, but also it moves a little bit too fast for professionals to be able to sight read at like the professional level. So it's usually a train wreck, which is hilarious, but in like a please don't fire me kind of way. In the Matthew Passion, the themes are the chorales, the Lutheran hymns, the sing-alongs that Bach sprinkled all through the whole piece. He used quite a few, and you might even recognize some of the tunes, but the one he came back to the most is a hymn called O Haupt voll Blut und Wunden. It comes back 6 times throughout the whole piece, but don't worry, it's not going to be boring. See, since the dawn of church organs, hymns have been subject to something called reharmonization. That's when the melody the congregation sings stays the same, but everything else underneath it changes, usually because the organist gets bored. And honestly, most people don't even realize they're doing it, or if they do, they don't give a shit. But from time to time, reharmonizations are more intentionally thought out, and sometimes even written down ahead of time. And that's what we have here. Bach has intentionally changed things based on the text or where he's putting it throughout the work. The first time we hear this hymn is right after the Last Supper. Normal, right? This is what you'd expect. It sounds perfectly liturgically rhymed church. But then fast forward to when Jesus dies. Much slower, and the first thing we notice is it's a new key. Sad, dark, heavy. The text here is, when I die, stay with me, don't leave me. When I'm afraid and I'm in pain, be my strength. Because we've just heard Jesus pleading, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? And then we've heard this slow, agonizing death. And the idea here is we can hear, let's listen. God, Bach is so good. We see our own death coming for us, right? We know. I'm sorry. I keep having to stop. But we know that we protect expected in our final hours because we've just seen the Savior go through this. So we want to have this final little bit of hope in the end. You can kind of see why this piece has a reputation for making people convert, just Bach in general. And I'm not a religious person, but I get it. Although personally, I'll stick with the tattoo.